There's been a lot of talk in the news about what happened on January 6th.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of people being persecuted for just being there.
Well, it's not that you feel. That's absolutely what's happening. They are literally in prison, people, for just being there peacefully on the grounds. That's actually accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen people in jail, and we just had a close friend that got arrested. And
he was just there.
Yeah.
He didn't do anything. He got arrested.
He was there peacefully protesting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was screaming, let's take our country back, but he didn't do nothing physically. Or
didn't harm anybody. Didn't hurt anybody.
Yeah. Freedom of speech.
Yeah, that's the beauty of our country. Yeah. So I will tell you that if you had told me 3 years ago that January 6th was the product of government entrapment, I would have said that's crazy talk.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Far right, conspiracy theorizing. And I was the CEO back then. And so I think of myself as an independent thinker. I was writing my book, Woke Inc. I was a conservative.
Mm-hmm.
But if you told me that, the government orchestrated this, I would have said, I never dismiss anything out of hand, but I would say that sounds a little fringy to me.
Right.
I think if you look at the facts right now, I think it's my belief that there was some level of government involvement. The only question is how much.
I think if the government wanted to prevent that from happening, they could have, but they failed to do so.
I think it's deeper than that. I think there was somebody who was convicted, who was taken to court, but who was acquitted in the final steps. Where there was a Capitol Police officer opening the door, waving their hand and say, "Come on in." Well, if you got a police officer opening the door and saying, "Come on in," and then you come in and then they arrest you for it, that's entrapment.
Right.
So it depends on how deep down this rabbit hole you want to go.
That's the whole basis of them trying to remove Trump because of the 14th Amendment, which was what was meant to keep the Confederacy from
of course,
running for
Section
president.
3 of the
That's
14th
what
Amendment,
it was for.
which has been bastardized into this other legal theory that Maine to Colorado is using, and we'll see where the Supreme Court comes out. I mean, I hope and expect they're going to come out and saying this is nonsense.
Yeah, it's not.
But we will see.
You would think.
But we will see. Yeah. We will see. And I think that, as I said, and this goes back to the earlier discussion, I am hopeful for what is possible this November, reuniting this country, but I'm very worried about what happens between now and then. And I've said so, and one of the things my purpose in being in the race was to speak some of those hard truths. Mm-hmm. The left got mad at me before some people in our own movement got mad at me, but I still stand by it. I'm worried about what this holds in store. Even if you go back to the truth of what happened on January 6th. So you guys remember that Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot?
Right, yeah.
Michigan? Mm-hmm. So that began as a plot to storm the Michigan state capitol. Interesting how that began. How did that begin as a plot? Turns out the FBI put a lot of people up to that plot. And how do we know? At the end of the trial, where multiple of these defendants in what became the kidnapping plot for Gretchen Whitmer, they were acquitted by a jury of their peers when the jury of their peers found that these people weren't going to do it but for the FBI putting them up to do it. So one of these guys, I mean, they're giving them, these are poor people. They're exploiting poor people. They give them credit cards, $5,000 credit card, go buy munitions. I mean, one of these guys apparently was using a Mexican restaurant across the street for hot water. I mean, these are people who are not in good conditions,
poor, yeah.
who were exploited, like poor.
Mm-hmm.
And they put them up to the plot. They're angry. A lot of the so-called militia organization was infiltrated up and down with feds anyway. At trial, the jury says, okay, actually, these people weren't going to do it, but for the FBI and the police putting them up to it. They acquit them. One of the jurors gives this gentleman a hug at the end, apologizes for what these people had been put through. The person who was the Detroit field office head of the FBI is a guy whose last name is D'Antono. In October of 2020, he gets a promotion to be the D.C. field office head. You know what happens 3 months later?
January 6th.
Yeah. So then what happens on January 6th? You see the footage. Everybody sees the famous footage of the mainstream media of people who were violently, storming the Capitol and whatever. What they didn't show you was video footage that's come out years later, which is rubber bullets, tear gas into a peaceful audience. Then you see the reaction of those people. Suddenly, that was only video footage released. But then the other video footage that wasn't released was the Capitol Police just opening the doors, people coming on in. So much so that one of them was even waving him to come in, and the guy who came in ended up getting acquitted at trial over that exact fact.
Do you think Tucker Carlson lost his job over that?
So I think that there was probably I wasn't in that situation. So I have no idea what the dynamics were. I will say that Tucker was one of the early people who was asking hard questions. And so I remembered in January at the time when I saw it, I was like, this is terrible what's happening in the country. But then Tucker started asking some questions that opened my eyes, even that year, to say, okay, there's a little bit of weirdness here, right? This math doesn't add up. You have an FBI that's lied for a long time. And then the more You know, we didn't run for, but I'm a CEO. This is not my professional job. I've got other things to do. I'm raising a kid. My wife's got a full-time job. Like most, I'm bringing that up because that's the position most people are in. I'm glad Tucker at least began to ask some hard questions. But then now I'm running for U.S. president. Okay, if I'm actually moving on from my business career, we're actually running for this country. This is one of the most important events that everybody discusses. It's my responsibility to not just take what's force-fed, to get to the bottom of what exactly happened based on the publicly available information alone. Mm-hmm. And one after another. It's one anomaly after another. Mm-hmm. You have Christopher Wray, the media, and I would have the CNNs of the world try to play gotcha with me. Say that, but he said there were no there was no FBI agents in the field that day and no FBI informants. So I said, is that what he said? I mean, just because he said it doesn't mean I believe him, but is that even what he said? So you go back to the congressional testimony. It's not what he said. That's what the media says he says. What he says is, we're not able to answer that question, but what I can tell you is that these conspiracy theories are dangerous or wrong or whatever it is he said. Mm-hmm. But he never said. The head of the FBI even never is the one. Right. The guy who gave the promotion to the Detroit field office head, the Detroit field office that was involved in setting up the fake Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot that the people were acquitted for on grounds of entrapment, the same FBI head, Christopher Wray, who gave him a promotion to then head the D.C. field office head 3 months before January 6, 2021, when he's testifying before Congress, won't give a straight answer on whether there were FBI field agents in the field that day on January 6th or whether there were FBI informants, but simply says that, well, that's not something that we're able to discuss. But when the media then distills that to the people and say, when I'm bringing up these questions to say, oh, this guy's a conspiracy theorist and spreading misinformation, say that Christopher Wray has already said that there were no field officers in the field that day. That's just dead wrong. But that's how the media does it. They'll use some source as the basis to say something that's slightly different, and it's a whole game of it's almost like that game of telephone, right, that by the time it reaches the average viewer at home who has 2 kids and a job and a schedule to maintain, has the right values for the country, but doesn't have the independent ability to go into this for themselves, that's how you dupe an entire country.
Yeah.
And so that's what gave me my special sense of responsibility in this race, to speak the hard truths that really, in this case, nobody else is willing to touch that. Mm-hmm. Or same thing with respect to the immigration policies at the border, the intentionality of it. Mm-hmm. Hard truths about, go straight down the list of what we've been lied to, the origin of COVID-19. If you told it came from a lab, if you were told that it came from a lab in China, whoever said that was a racist and a xenophobe. Well, now we know that it absolutely came from that lab in China. Your social media account would have been locked for you saying it.
Right.
The Hunter Biden laptop story, you could not share that on the eve of the last election. It was Russian disinformation. Suppress it. Now we know that it absolutely was grounded in truth.
Everything they accuse Republicans of doing, they're actually doing in front
on
of
steroids,
everybody.
Right? Yeah. And this is George Orwell. I mean, he was a great author, great thinker.
Right.
Anybody who's telling you they're actually the threat to democracy, the people who claim to be the threats to democracy, or claim the other side is the threats to democracy, are the ones actually presenting that greatest threat in their own right. Yeah. And so war is peace. Truth is fiction.
Man is women.
Man is women.
And women
exactly.
is men.
Exactly. It's the denial of actual truth itself. And that was the slogan of our campaign. One word. Truth.